There's that fresh beat.
Been talking about it for some time. New music, new background upgrade. Shout out to Billy Coker, the entire team. This is Freightonomics. I'm Anthony Smith.
And I'm Zac Strickland.
Zac Strickland. And thank you so much for tuning in.
So, Anthony, we've got a big show today.
We do.
So, first off, though, we need to talk about what we do here at Freightonomics. What do we do on Freightonomics?
Glad you asked. Freightonomics is the podcast where we bring freight and economics together, and the two make a wonderful pairing. You have Zac Strickland, who has an immense background in the freight industry.
The freight guy.
The freight guy. I am Anthony Smith, the lead economist here at FreightWaves, and bringing the tonomics to Freightonomics. And I have a background, the econ. I have a background in macroeconomic advisory at the executive level for various industries, whether it's manufacturing or consumer side. And we are just excited to be here right now. I mean, as you mentioned, we have a full show today. We even have a special guest that might be joining us here shortly. And
Zac too.
Zac too.
Coming back. Because it's that time again.
It's that time again. Talking about the LMI and a couple of other macroeconomic releases and some of the top stories today in the freight industry. Also, we are streaming, I believe, on most of these, on either LinkedIn and Facebook. So I'm going to have that pulled up here so you can join in on the conversation if you are watching live. But without further ado, Zac.
Yeah.
Z1.
Z1. Yeah, we'll get to Zac 2 here a little bit later. But first off, we want to lead off with, the top stories of the day. The freight market obviously is, not been terribly volatile here of late in terms of, really week-to-week movement, something that we've diverged from March, April, May, very, very volatile months in terms of up, down, up, not sure. And the June market has pushed us back to more of what we traditionally see in the seasonal, upticks in June. We're actually not that far off of what we would normally see in terms of, I would say, a seasonal movement. Now, volumes are up, but rates are still way down. So that means that capacity is still pretty available. We've got a 5.6-ish tender rejection rate sitting out there right now, which is pretty indicative of around where we would think 2019-ish rate levels would be, but we're up over 2018 volume levels. Now, this is I think this is a confusing state of being for a lot of people that are in the market, Anthony Smith, because normally there's a lot of demand. You think, that's going to compress the supply.
Yeah.
But carriers are just coming off of sitting around for a month, expecting the worst. So they're definitely taking into account the fact that any freight that they get offered, they need to go ahead and take advantage of it. So we are seeing a very, a very soft rate market right now. Volumes are still pretty strong, so take care of that utilization factor, as a lot of you carriers do. But I think the top story of the week, or at least at the moment, right now, is sitting on that FMCSA ruling that they're canceling, some of that HOS exemption for some of these sectors that they were doing for the COVID-19 outbreak. Of course, we're talking about the hours of service rule, 11 hours that you can drive, 14 hours that you can be on duty. They had exempted, food, drugs, anything that you can name almost as, any kind of DC replenishment orders. Just name it, and they were exempting that. They have now pulled back on that to an extent. It was set to expire June 19th. A lot of those do still expire. A lot of the food products still are now it's going to go back to where it was. You're back on the 11-hour, 14-hour clock. So a lot of the reefer carriers, things like that, any DC replenishment, now it's just restricted to medical supplies, anything that's actually directly related to the COVID-19, outbreak. You're basically really limited to emergency equipment, things like that. Much smaller livestock feed, et cetera, is in that as well. So, the scale of that has reduced significantly, and so that's probably going to, I think, have a downward impact on that capacity, because essentially hours of service requirements were eliminated for just about anything until June 14th. Here in a few days, that's expiring. They're going to get another month out of the rest of it just to see where they stand. So, this to me is kind of a signal that the government is kind of seeing that things are returning to normal, and we're seeing that in the data. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by this somewhat, but it's like you said, it's a return to normalcy, and that's refreshing to see. And I'm always skeptical when these kind of things are put in place. What's it going to be like kind of peeling them back, whether it might be a new regulation or a new policy. I'm thinking, all right, sounds nice now, but when you take this away, how easy is that going to be? That's always my skepticism here. So it sounds like there is some return to normalcy here. And so I guess, would you say the recovery is on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the data supports that. I think the data supports this decision. We're seeing, we obviously monitor a lot of different data sets here. We have the Passport team has been looking at a lot of credit card consumer information here of late. For those Passport subscribers out there, you would have seen this. And we're starting to see where, food and beverage peaking, just going, all in April, even throughout the pandemic, the major shutdowns. It's starting to return to a normal pattern of consumer spending. We're seeing other things such as electronics. Obviously, we talked about home improvement a few weeks ago. They're actually overachieving already, starting at the end of April. People sitting at their houses, buying up that Home Depot, Lowe's, wood building material stuff. So I think it's basically kind of a result of what we're already seeing in the data. Do they need to be exempt? I don't think so. Not at this point. I think we're starting to see the country, even though there's still a lot of places that are shut down and have not fully returned to normal. We're seeing that demand side stuff already come back. So we're, I think the government's reflecting that in their decision here because it is about safety with the FMCSA. You do not need to have extended period of time. We do this with hurricanes and other natural disasters. Once things start to kind of slow down or the volatility removes itself from the situation, people are not dropping, left and right from not having food and beverage. So I think that's, it's not an issue of safety at this point. So not something I'm not anticipating of this.
Yeah, yeah. And speaking of government.
Yeah, we had some big stuff come out. Now, I talked to you about this earlier today.
Yeah.
And I was like, Anthony, what's the deal? So CPI.
And I was like, meh.
You were like, he literally just shut me right off. And I was just like,
meh.
Dude, we had deflation.
Meh.
People, you're going to have to explain the CPI and why this is relevant for people. You're the economist here. Tell us what the CPI is and tell us why this is an important number to watch.
Sure. So as you mentioned, we have the CPI. There's also it stands for the Consumer Price Index. There's also the Producer Price Index. And what the CPI is, essentially, it measures the average change over time in the prices paid by customers or consumers in a market based on a market basket of consumer goods and services. So essentially, are they more expensive to buy or less expensive to buy for consumers? Conversely, there's the Producer Price Index. Is it more or less expensive to produce these goods and services? So what we saw was some downward movement, I think, for the third straight month for the CPI. And so I think what that will do is going to allow, we've seen a lot of Fed activity, of course, with the recent events of everything in the economy. And I think that's going to allow them to feel more comfortable with making certain movements and staying active in a financial stimulus sense when we're looking at different stimulus packages or plans or policies being rolled out in the coming months.
Yeah, and we've got a Fed action on deck today, correct? Do we?
Do we?
Did I miss that?
We had Jerome Powell talk.
Yeah. I thought we had a something they were going to do this afternoon.
The FOMC announcement?
Yeah, maybe that's what I was thinking about. Anyway, So the CPI, of course, basically inflation. So basically what this means is that you are paying less for again, they excluded food and beverage from this, did they not?
You could do the core.
Yeah, they just did the core. Mm-hmm. I think this is what this was reporting. So excluding food and beverage, you're paying less for consumer products than you were a month ago by 0.1%.
Yeah.
So basically a lot of discounts. This actually makes sense to me. I kind of overreacted. I was being a little drama queen to Anthony just to see if I could get a reaction. But considering the fact that people aren't going to retail stores, they're not allowed to go out, this is a reflection of discounts, people having too much inventory, they're trying to get people to buy stuff online, et cetera. It is not really a true deflationary number, in my opinion, where you would be very concerned about deflation just because that's a sign that the economy itself is collapsing. This is not that. This is simply just a correction to like incentivize people to get out and purchase things. They've got some government stimulus packages out there that are, burning some holes into some people's pockets, I guess. So again, I think this is good for freight in general. It just means that people are out there still looking to consume things, which means more freight on trucks, et cetera. But moving on from this, unemployment rate.
Yeah. So, I mean, we had a few things that came out since our last chat here on Freightonomics. We have the unemployment rate, which came out surprisingly low here at...
But they had to do a little bit of a wiggle here, correct?
Yeah.
They had to do a correction. Somebody slept on their keyboard a bit.
There was a misclassification in a sense here. And so we saw that the most recent number that was released, I think it was Friday, showed it was a 13.3% unemployment rate. That was a little bit lower than people were expecting. We were expecting somewhere in the high teens to some are expecting even like low 20%. And so the issue came in when the job status as employed but absent for work did not count towards unemployment total. So that really kind of shook things up. And if that misclassification wasn't in place, we expect it to have hit somewhere around potentially the 16% mark or maybe even higher. So there was a misclassification there. The good news is, if there is good news, about 3/4 of the overall unemployment numbers that came in were due to temporary layoffs. So that talks to folks starting to come back or have some hopes of coming back instead of permanent separations.
Yeah, so my takeaway from this, something we've said here before, I believe, is the fact that this is not a true 16.3% unemployment rate.
Yeah.
It's not comparable to the Depression or the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. These are temporary layoffs that are not permanent. A lot of the employers are bringing these people back. They simply were able to give them unemployment benefits while they did not need their services.
Yeah.
So again, everybody expecting an increase in this in May. It comes back down, just validating the fact that we have come off the bottom, substantially. Things should be moving forward. They are moving forward. All the stats line up, back up to a 13.3%, sorry, that was the error. But we're still increasing like employment levels. So that means that people are coming back to work, coming back into the office. I still don't think it is a pure number in terms of where you can really apply, the 15% unemployment rate to the economy itself.
Yeah.
Because they are getting that stimulus package, they are still able to spend that money. So, again, everything's positive right here for me. It's still, maybe it's not as aggressive as, the drop was, but it's still a move in the right direction.
It's movement. It's movement. And I think the movement was what people expected, but a little bit sooner than what people expected. Mm-hmm. And then that misclassification really kind of shakes things up again. But yeah, we have brilliant people running these numbers. And talking about brilliant people,
we're moving in the right direction now.
Yeah, we are moving in the right direction. And talking about brilliant people behind brilliant numbers, we're here with Zac Rogers of Colorado State University. He is a professor there, and he is also one of the main guys that helped put together, leading the charge with the Logistics Managers Index. Hello, Dr. Zac Rogers.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Zach 2, affectionately called Zach 2.
Right. Yeah, Zach 2. Yeah. On this podcast, I'm happy to be Zach 2.
You're
as long as you guys are the #1 logistics and economics podcast, I can be Zach 2. You guys are great.
You're Zach 1 in my book. Well, thank you for joining us, Zach.
Absolutely. No, I'm happy to be here.
And Zach, one of the things I mentioned here, for those of you who may not have tuned in last time, Dr. Rogers was here with us. He heads up the Logistics Managers Index with a group of brilliant professors throughout the country. Zach, can you give us a quick rundown of what the LMI is and what some of the latest changes are.
Sure. So it's an index they put together with Dale Rogers from Arizona State University, Stephen Carnevale from the Rochester Institute of Technology, Ron Lemke from University of Nevada, and Shen Yenyert from Rutgers University. And so the Logistics Managers Index, or LMI, is a diffusion or change index that we put out every month. And basically what we do is we ask a couple hundred respondents who are all kind of director level and above, where 8 different supply chain logistics metrics are going. So we ask them about inventory levels, inventory costs, warehousing cost, capacity, and utilization, and transportation cost, capacity, and utilization. And all we ask them is it staying the same? Is it going down? Is it going up? We average those scores together, and basically we get a 0 to 100 index. And so 50 means no movement at all. Anything over 50 means increasing, under 50 means decreasing, and in the higher above 50 it is, the greater the magnitude of growth is. The lower, below 50, the more below 50 it is, the greater the magnitude of contraction is. I don't know why that was so hard to say, but so that's sort of the way we do it. This month's LMI came out last Tuesday. And we always let it out the first Tuesday of every month. And the overall LMI right now is a 54.5, which is up from last month, where it was a 51, which was the lowest we had ever seen. Now, it's important to point out, I think, and Anthony, we talked about this a little bit last week. Maybe that was this week. I think time is really running in a flat circle for me right now. So the important thing to point out here is that transportation is coming back, but still negative in some places, okay? So we're still seeing transportation capacity kind of increase. So we have a little bit of excess capacity. And prices are at 49, which basically means, 49 is close enough to 50 that we would almost call that no movement, but it's slightly negative. So prices are slightly down. Now, if you compare that to last month, prices were like a 37, which was the lowest they had ever been. And so essentially what we're seeing with on the transportation side is we had a big drop, okay? So from basically mid-March to the end of April, transportation was just, on the downward slope of a roller coaster, basically. In May, it's still down, but very, very slightly. And so I think what we're seeing now is sort of the plateau piece of the kind of U-shaped recovery we're going to have. When I was here last time, we talked about, it's not going to be a V-shaped recovery. It's going to be a U, hopefully not a W, but maybe a U. And what I think that the May numbers tell us is that sort of downward curve of the U, we're done with that. So we've bottomed out, and now we're starting this sort of slow slope back up. The problem is going to be that delta, that upward delta, is going to be a lot smaller. It's going to take us a lot longer, just like, going up or down a hill on your bike or whatever. It's going to take us a lot longer to come back up than it did to come back down.
Now, Zach, I got to ask. So, I guess in my mind, the V-shaped recovery was, I was pretty skeptical of that call in general, but at the same time, I have to be concerned about the definition of what a V-shaped recovery is. Now, V-shaped to me means that you bounce down at the same rate that you came, you basically recover at the same rate that you fell down.
Yep.
And essentially what you're saying is that we're going to recover at a slower rate than we fell down out of March. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yep. So we're on the way back up. We have hit the bottom now, and that's assuming, I'm sure you guys saw there's some states, Anthony's home state of Arizona would be one of them, where the virus has come back a little bit from where it was because, everyone in Anthony's neighborhood needed to get out golfing last month or whatever. But so it has started coming back a little bit. And so what this assumes is that we don't see a really big second wave coming back, because obviously a big second wave comes back and, all bets are off probably. But if we kind of maintain where we are right now, we're now on the sort of slowly curving back up part of that recovery.
So
now, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry to interrupt, but I would just ask, are there any specific sectors that you're seeing recover faster than others?
Yeah, sure. I mean, grocery, sort of the day-to-day stuff is doing really well. What I can tell you is that there's sectors we're seeing recover more slowly.
Okay.
The worst one right now is apparel. Apparel,
right.
Furniture, electronics are just getting slammed. I mean, JCPenney is going bankrupt, all that stuff. I was looking at some data from the International Council of Shopping Centers, the ICSC. It's actually a really good data source, and it said that at shopping centers, basically, apparel sales are down 89% year over year. So I mean, it's just an absolute bloodbath over there.
That's brutal.
Yeah, and they're down in a way that really hurts because they have a lot of inventory. Okay, and so one of the things that we saw in the LMI this month is that inventory levels and warehousing continue to act like the economy is really hot right now. Okay, so inventory costs right now are at a 66, which it should not be at a 66 if you're not moving. Right. If there's no demand, why are you spending all this money on inventory? Well, it's because we brought all this inventory in, and now it has no place to go. So warehousing capacity, I think, warehousing capacity and transportation prices, those were our only two metrics this month that we're tracking. We talked about why transportation prices are down, although it's sloping back up. Warehousing capacity is actually even lower than transportation, because we have all of this stuff and nowhere to put it. And so that part of the LMI, that sort of warehousing inventory part, is actually driving it up. It's why it's at a 54 right now, which is a decent, I mean, low, but decent rate of expansion. It's because sort of the storage piece of our economy is doing really well right now. So, what industries are really prospering? The warehousing and 3PL industry, specifically 3PLs, less of the focus on transportation, more of the focus on storage and warehousing. It's a great time to own a bunch of warehouses right now because they're all totally.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of the same thing now. How similar do you think this is? We saw some of this last year with the trade war. How similar of a pattern do you think this is with a lot of warehouse movement? So we're seeing a lot of movement between warehouses, between distribution centers. It's kind of propping some freight volumes up, I think, personally. How similar do you think this pattern is to that from 2019?
Well, what's funny is it's almost the opposite in some way. I mean, so it's the same phenomenon, but for different reasons. So we break this out into upstream and downstream firms. So downstream firms would be like retailers, basically anyone that's customer facing. And then upstream firms would be like carriers, distributors, manufacturers, things like that. And during the trade war, the downstream folks were keeping everything afloat, basically. So the consumer was really hot last year, even during the trade war. We had the manufacturing slump. Remember, the PMI went negative,
right?
But the consumer was still pretty hot. This year, we're kind of seeing something different because the folks using the warehousing it tends to be the upstream firms. Okay, downstream right now, they're canceling orders left and right. They don't, electronic stores, apparel stores, all those kind of places. They're not taking any new orders right now. The upstream folks, however, they were still seeing some inventory trickle in even recently because, it's a 3-month delay, maybe, if it's coming from, different parts of the world. And they're sort of the ones right now that are sort of stuck with the bill, basically. And so we have all of these upstream distributors that can't return things to their vendors and are just sitting on this big pile of inventory. And so those are the folks right now that are really utilizing these warehouse spaces. The downstream firms, the retailers, they're not utilizing the warehouses even close to the same rates. So, if you break out warehouse capacity by upstream and downstream, it's an even 50 right now for the downstream firms. So it's no movement at all. They've been able to stay pretty lean. Their warehousing prices are at 54, so pretty low levels of growth. Upstream respondents, it's a 46 for capacity, so they keep losing capacity, and their prices are a 63, which is 9 points higher than it is for the downstream folks. And so it's a really interesting observation you make, Zach, because there is a lot of similarities in the results of what we're seeing here with the trade war and warehousing and movement propping up transportation. The difference is that now all the storage is coming from upstream in the supply chain rather than downstream. And last year, those two were flipped.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, Zach, and real quick, I mean, we get to chat about the different components of the LMI, and that's one of the things I really like is that ability to break out the different attributes of the transportation industry. One of the really cool parts of the LMI report that I really like that maybe you can talk to a little bit here is some of those future predictions that your respondents talk to.
Yeah, so every month we ask them to, okay, 12 months from now, where do you see things going? And it tends to be pretty sunny. I don't know if it's hopeful or realistic or not. Although I will say, for the first 2.5 years of the LMI, our future predictions were actually really accurate. And again, this isn't us doing this. This is us saying, okay, in 12 months, where do you think this is going to be headed? And so, like, for transportation price, okay, that's a 49 right now. They're predicting a 66 a year from now, which is a much higher number. And if you look at what Powell said today, he said, oh, we're going to have a 5% GDP bounce in 2022. So, I mean, who knows what's going to happen? But if what Powell says is true, I think that our future predictions are probably pretty right on, in that we are going to start to see this come back. And honestly, 66, even though that seems like a high number right now, where we're at 49, 2 years ago at this time, we were at like a 91 or a 92, so
2018.
it wouldn't be totally unheard of. Yeah, 2018 was nuts. It wouldn't be totally unheard of for us to be bouncing back up if we see that recovery, sort of that slow sloping recovery happen the way that we think it would be. Because let's see, the last time that we were in the sort of mid 60s would have been, March of last year, actually. Right. So other than the one aberration that we had in the first 3 weeks of March this year, but so that would sort of make sense. So we'll slowly curve back up to sort of where we were.
So a 66 by this time next year is what you're predicting?
That's their prediction. Now, I don't know. I will say that I do think over the last year, I think these have tended to come in a little high. But I don't think it'll be 49 again. So, I mean, that would be
Well, Zach, thank you so much for joining us today. We surely appreciate your insights. It's been amazing as always. If you'd like to stick around, we're in the last few seconds of the show here. I think we have the next 30, 40 seconds here.
We always like to end up with a little question/debate, Zach. Yeah. So if you want to bear with us for just a second. So I was listening to SiriusXM's top 1,000 country songs of all time. What do you think the number one song was?
The number one country song?
Yep. All time.
I don't even know a lot of country songs. Is it Garth Brooks?
Yes.
Wow.
It was.
Wow.
It was Friends in Low Places. It was the first countdown.
Yeah. Well, that's a good one.
Well done. You get a
Genius.
prize. It was the first countdown that I was like, yes, I can swallow that.
Wow.
Well done. Well, that'll do it for this week's show.
Knocked it out.
Well done, Zach.
I was not expecting country music trivia. That's why you guys are the number one logistics economics show.